The Predators and the Blues could not have finished their seasons more differently. Today, we'll talk about what Nashville can do to bridge that substantial gap.
You're Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Predators podcast. Thanks for making us your first listen of the day. We are, of course, your free daily Nashville Predators podcast. We are a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to kick off this episode with a hearty shout out to our Locked On Predators insiders and our everydayers who tune in to talk Nashville Predators hockey with us. I'm Ann Kimmel. I am a writer and co-host with Penalty Box Radio and Friends. I have a partner in crime.
That you do. I am Emma Lingan, and I'm an NHL reporter and host for the Hockey News.
Well, the Nashville Predators desperately want to get back into the playoff conversation, but they cannot do that in a vacuum. We've been breaking down the Central Division teams that Nashville has got to stay competitive with if they want to get back to the playoffs. Today, we're going to talk about how the Predators stack up against the St. Louis Blues, who finished last season as one of the hottest teams in the entire league. We're going to look at how Nashville's roster stacks up against St. Louis. We're going to discuss the big coaching change that many in Nashville wish they had seen last season. And we're going to look ahead to their matchups next season. All right, Emma, we're breaking it down. Here are the teams that Nashville just has to hang with. And again, let us reiterate, don't sit expectantly waiting for the Colorado, Dallas, and Winnipeg episodes to drop because, why would we even?
We're not going to waste our time. Same with Chicago, but for the opposite reason.
Yeah.
It's like we all just kind of know. Hopefully. Yeah. Hopefully. Honestly.
Yes, there we are. Got a lot to talk about with this team. We've, of course, covered Minnesota. We've talked about Utah. We're talking about St. Louis. And this team had one of the most interesting stories last season. It was like the tale of two seasons. And of course, the biggest difference that I think people immediately jump to when they look at the difference between the beginning of the season and the amazing way that St. Louis finished the season, it all comes down to that one thing that Nashville Predators fans may be very jealous about. And friends, that is that fat coaching change that the Blues made.
Yep. They made the change in the middle of the season. And again, I think that was... I keep coming back to a lot of Predators fans. Well, if Jim Montgomery was available, why didn't Nashville go get him? Okay, couple things. I don't think St. Louis was planning on making a coaching change had he not come available.
Correct.
And I think he was only going to go to St. Louis in the middle of a season. He's not from there. His wife is from there. He has played there. He coached there before. I mean, it all just made a little too much sense. This was not like Nashville missed their chance. There was no chance. They weren't getting Jim Montgomery. And we don't even know if he would be the right fit. It worked. It was a shot in the arm for St. Louis. But again, I don't think that we can pin it all on the coaching change. That has an effect. You get, it gives you a little bit of a shot in the arm. We also saw it in Detroit last year. You see it where it'll be like a kind of immediate effect, and then it usually kind of tapers back to the median. Although in St. Louis, it really didn't. But there were some other key things that happened too, like say the addition of Cam Fowler, the arrival of Jimmy Snuggerud, you've got all these other factors. I mean, the whole offer sheet thing, I mean, that happened before the season, but with Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway, I mean, there were a lot of things working in St. Louis's favor last year. Now, that being said, it is pretty remarkable, the surge they had in the second half. Reminds me a bit of another Central Division team that had quite the second half surge 2 seasons ago. Maybe
Yep.
an 18-game point streak in there. I don't know. Maybe got the GM a little too excited and he went and spent all their money in the offseason. So I would say, St. Louis or Nashville should be a cautionary tale for St.
Yes.
Louis.
Yeah.
That being
Like,
said,
been there. Been
yeah,
there.
I don't think that St. Louis really did too much in the offseason to like they didn't have a Barry Trotz shopping spree. That being said, this year's free agent class was not as
Yeah.
as last year's was. Um, but I mean, that being said, I think, they made some additions. They didn't go crazy. Which normally, though, I would point to as like, well, there's St. Louis once again, just making like little nip, little tuck. They're not making any moves. They stay in the mushy middle, like very much.
Mhm.
And it was getting to a point last season where even, before the trade deadline, it was like, are they gonna trade Braden Shen? He's their captain,
Right.
he's a veteran and, they really need to kickstart this rebuild. I don't know. They end up hanging on to him, I think in part because the asking price for him was probably pretty high. And then they go on this crazy run. And so it's like St. Louis has always kind of been one of those teams, not always, but always meaning in like the last 5 years. They've kind of been one of those teams that has sort of hovered around the
Mhm.
middle. Don't rock the boat, don't mess with anything. It's very much like the David Poyle
Yes.
run
The
Predators.
vibes.
It's very
Yes.
similar. And so I think fans were getting to a point where they're getting restless. It's like, all right, you gotta do something. We gotta start the rebuild, trade Shen, do all that. And they didn't. And so now, maybe they didn't go out and add all the pieces like Barry Trotz did 2 off seasons ago, but they also didn't really kickstart any kind of rebuild by trading
Mhm.
away any veterans. Now, this season will probably tell us whether or not they should have under, we'll get their first full season under Jim Montgomery, but it'll be interesting to see. It's like at least the first half of this story feels very much like
It
Nashville
does.
2.0.
It does. It's like we have been there and we know how exciting those franchise streaks are, those amazing wins. Now, granted, with Nashville, it was points and it was straight wins, baby, for St. Louis. But the carryover is challenging. And even if you're talking about changeover in roster, I think it's great to end where St. Louis ended the season, but you've got to be able to pick up where you're at and keep going. And you're right. St. Louis is one of those teams where they've always been like the C student. They do enough, and are they
C63.
yeah. And are they going to be able to kind of push through and become even more competitive towards the top of the division, which is where you think they're headed if you look at how they ended last season. I want to circle back to the coaching change because that was such a hot topic. And when you look at the numbers in St. Louis, it may make Predators fans go, oh my gosh, why didn't we do this? They were 9-12-1 before the firing. I think you make such a great point. Jim Montgomery was available for 5 whole days, y'all. And I don't know that they would have made the change if they didn't know that's our guy. And they knew that was their guy so much they signed him to a 5-year deal. Like there's no interim here. This is what we want. They finished the season after the coaching change 35, 18, and 7. So that is a dramatic turnaround. But I agree with you. I think it's easy to say it's all about the coaching change. Here's what I will say about a coaching change. And I know this may not be popular. I don't know that Nashville will see one regardless of how this team plays, because this is what I am thinking. And we'll do a podcast on this maybe another day, or maybe the season will start so well we won't ever have to talk about this again. But I'm just going to throw this out there. If Nashville struggles, I suspect that Barry Trotz will hang on to Andrew Brunette. He will jettison the UFAs make room in the roster. Granted, a lot of that's going to be in the bottom 6 positions for youth to come in, and then they're just going to circle Andrew Brunette back to coaching this team that's focused on developing youth like he was hired to do. I just don't think, if things go bad, Barry Trotz is just going to circle around, clear some space, bring in some youth, and let Bruno have a crack at that. That's how I think it's going to go down.
And he's going to do the Barry Trotz thing where he's like, guys, what are you talking about? This was always the plan. Like, this is what I said we were going to do.
Are we going to get gaslit by Barry Trotz?
He's going to try. I mean, that's what he does. But he's the whole, like with the whole, the plan is in pen and the path is in pencil. That gem of a line that we got from him over and over last year.
Mm-hmm.
That is what this is. The plan is in pen, has always been, so he'll always be able to say, well, guys, this has always been the plan. Like we were always trying to make room for the youth. And it's like, well, not really. No.
I've got several $1 million to say that is false, but go ahead, Barry.
Yes, but you said it, and we have the receipts that you said it when you took over. So now you can go back to that and say, see, I said it. So I'm just reiterating what I said. So yeah, we're definitely going to get gaslit by Barry Trotz if the season does not go well. And I think you're exactly right. I don't think Andrew Brunette's seat is as hot as a lot of fans want to think it is.
Yeah. And again, it comes back to what you saw from St. Louis. It's not about the coach you want to get rid of. It's about having the coach you want available. That is huge. Coming up,
Which is actually kind of what happened with Andrew Brunette and John Hines in Nashville, except it wasn't mid-season. It was after the season, but same kind of idea.
Yeah. Huh. Look at us now. Anyway, the way St. Louis finished their season and performed in their postseason makes it look like on the surface, the Nashville Predators are not going to be able to hang with the Blues in the standings. Coming up, we're going to tell you whether we think that will really be true next season. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Most people can't name all of their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it is 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there is Monarch Money. It is an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you have put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all of your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of all of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Monarch is a great tool for young adults setting long-term financial goals, and it makes it easier for partners to stay on the same page when it comes to financial collaboration. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. All right, Emma, when we look at the way the season's ended, it feels like there is just no way Nashville is going to be able to hang with St. Louis. You want to talk about timing is everything. St. Louis hit their stride at the most perfect time. Nashville just still not striding. No strides. But when you look at things on paper, personnel wise, and we come back to this, we have said this with Minnesota, we've said this with Utah, and I'm going to say it when it comes to St. Louis, especially when we are looking at goaltending. I feel like Nashville is just fine in goaltending. And I know some of you are going to be like, but UC Saros sucked. Yeah, it was not great, but I'm not long-term concerned about UC Saros. Also, can I just tell you, I had no idea Jordan Binnington was 32 years old. He doesn't act that old.
No, he does not. He has been around for a bit.
I was surprised.
He is the opposite of Connor Hellebuck in terms of effectiveness when it comes to regular season versus postseason / best on best competition. It's like they Freaky Friday with each other for those things. Although even I don't know, even Bennington, that's a little mean. Bennington isn't bad during the regular season. Like Connor Hellebuck was bad during the playoffs, but neither here nor there. I agree. I'm not worried about goaltending at all.
Not at all.
If you were asking me to rank, like do some sort of definitive ranking of goaltending in the Central Division, I would have Nashville ahead of St. Louis. That's just that. And I think that that's not an area I'm worried about. Now, if you listen to certain inflammatory voices who will try to tell you that last year UC Saros was terrible and he's always been terrible and he's going to be terrible forever, that's simply not true, just based on his entire body of work. So, again, until we see a pattern of UC Saros being bad, like,
that's the least of the worries based on what we know. That is the least of the worries. Also, volume doesn't equal wisdom. Just throwing that out there in sports and in life. Volume doesn't equal wisdom. Here's what is so interesting to me about St. Louis. When you look in the Central Division at some of these teams that are amazing, they don't have a McKinnon. They don't have a Kaprizov. They don't have a Mikko Rantanen and everybody else that Dallas has. But they just have really good players who are consistently really good. Not like pop off, McKinnon level. We're not talking like top 10 players in the league. They just have really good players who play really well most of the time. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, we'd kill for that. Dude. We'd love that.
Didn't see that for 84 years. They have Jordan Kyrou in 82 games last season, 36 goals, 70 points. That's a fantastic season. Robert Thomas, 70 games, 21 goals, 81 points. You talked about Braden Shen, the other Shen brother, our second favorite Shen brother. 82 games, 18 goals, 50 points. And here's the thing, they just up and down the lineup get stuff. They get bang for their buck up and down the lineup when you're looking at the forward group. And then you kind of look at Nashville's forward group. And of course, Nashville's big players, with the exception, and I do want to say this, with the exception of Philip Forsberg, didn't get the numbers that you're used to seeing or that they are capable of. And then you look at the depth and it's like, okay, you got to get more from your bottom six offensively. Nashville does, if you want to compete with a team like St. Louis.
Yeah, because like you said, St. Louis, it's like maybe their ceiling isn't as high, but like, where the floor is, and the floor is pretty good. And you just kind of know what you're going to get. But again, it's never been quite good enough. When I say never, I'm really talking about the last like 5 years. Not quite good enough. And it's very like, well, it's good enough. We're going to sneak into the playoffs, or at least, just get really close to it. But we're not going to do anything drastic. And they didn't, I don't think that they became big time buyers this offseason, but then again, who did? I mean, there's really not
a lot on the shelves at Trader Joe's.
No, there wasn't a ton. So, but the moves they did make, I would argue, in the context of this particular offseason, were kind of buyer moves. I mean, they got Pius Suter from Vancouver. He was a free agent. Now, again, I think that's a situation where Suter did what was absolutely the smart move, which was to capitalize on the fact that he probably was one of the best centers available in the on the market at that time. He knew that he could get more money somewhere else, and he did. He went to St. Louis. Again, kind of guy that, would have liked Nashville to maybe take a closer look at, but hey, but I mean, that's like the 2025 version of being a buyer this
Right.
offseason. I mean, St.
Right.
Louis did that. They shored up their center depth. So this to me says that, like, look, all that talk about Braden Shen, we're going to trade him and whatever. Now St. Louis, now Doug Armstrong's gaslighting us. Like, no, we were never going to do that. We've always been in the win now mode. And that's kind of what I see them doing. And they've got, they're really strong defensively. Like I mentioned, they got Cam Fowler. They've got Broberg and Holloway off the offer sheets from the Oilers last year. I mean, Justin Falk, who I feel like has been around forever. But he's, just like a solid, just defensive stalwart back there. I mean, they've got pieces, whereas like they don't have like you said, the Kaprizov or the McKinnon, the guy who's really going to knock your socks off. But it's like the collective is very good.
Yes, I agree. The collective is it's what is it? The whole is more than the sum of the parts, or there's some sort of mathematical equation-y thing. You know what I'm talking about. I think it's so interesting what St. Louis was able to do, because we talked about they struggled a little bit in the start. In their first 22 games, they had 13 games where they scored 2 or fewer goals. 2 or fewer goals. By the end of the season, I know, I was like, I remember how that feels, and it feels a little bit like drinking vinegar. Yeah. But they finished the season, quite unlike the Nashville Predators, 10th in the league in goals for. They also gave up the 7th fewest goals against. They have the 7th best goal differential, 3rd best in the entire league when it comes to goals for above expected. They scored almost 19 more goals than they were expected to. To put that in perspective, Nashville's goals for above expected, -37. That means they didn't score 37 goals that they were expected to. Yeah, that feels great. That feels
accurate.
That feels like exactly what we saw unfold here in Nashville and saw from a distance happen for St. Louis. It's very interesting where they ended up based on where they started. And like you said, they made some changes. So is this the time where St. Louis has done enough? Especially, again, we come back to they're in that competitive Central Division as well. We're going to have to wait and see what they do. Coming up, we're going to talk about what the season is going to look like as the Blues and the Predators face off. Can Nashville stay within shouting distance of a hot St. Louis team? Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is finally here, and FanDuel is making sure you are ready for all those kickoffs with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. You're going to love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet, whether it's player props, building a same-game parlay, or jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game even more exciting, whether you are watching your favorite team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, Emma, St. Louis was such a fun story. I thought they were phenomenal in the postseason. They were down 2-0 against Winnipeg, and I still was not worried. That is how good I thought the St. Louis team was when they needed to be. Nashville was not good really ever last season really consistently. Not great. And here's what you have to realize. St. Louis had that amazing, 12-game win streak? Was that what it was? 12 games. You're welcome from Nashville, who chipped in several of those wins for you. through that stretch of March into April. Nashville went 0-4 against St. Louis last season. 0-4, baby. They were outscored 18-8. But there was only 11 shot difference in the series. Nashville actually had 11 more shots than St. Louis. Just couldn't convert them into goals. Tell me something you haven't heard before. So, I mean, Emma, we come back to this question as we're working through the series. What has to be better for Nashville to compete and get some wins against the St. Louis team?
Well, they've got to score some more goals. Maybe
How about
let's
it?
start with 37 more as a benchmark. That seems like a good goal.
Let's
A
get to
good
baseline.
Yeah, maybe 37 more goals. And then the defense, again, I go back to this St. Louis defense is really strong.
Yeah.
And refer to our earlier episode about how not strong Nashville's defense is to tell you all you need to know there. But again, going back to the goaltending conversation, that's something where I actually think that Nashville has an edge, or could, in theory, if their defense was better.
Yeah.
And on paper, once again, Nashville's defense looks a lot better than it was last year. But we got to see it in action. But it's one of those things where I think, you saw the impact of a bad defense on the goaltender in Nashville last year. And so I think that that's, to me, just looking at these two rosters, that's the biggest thing that jumps out to me from last season. Like, wow,
Yeah.
this defense was significantly better.
Yeah. Nashville's defense also has to be better when it comes to interrupting and being successful against odd man rushes, because St. Louis absolutely whooped Nashville when it came to that quick transition game, odd man rushes, also capitalizing on mistakes, of which Nashville made plenty last season. And St. Louis was one of those teams where they could get the turnover, they could get through the zone. And it always turned, I mean, like, there were so many odd man rushes in these, head-to-head games last season. And that's something where Nashville, you have got to stop that. Like, you have to limit their chances, because again, what you're going to do with that is you're going to stick UC Saros out to dry, and his numbers may not look good, but those are the situations that impact a goaltender as well. When you've got a 3-on-1, best of luck to UC Saros, and his statistics as they go. So I think you've really got to watch those things with a team like St. Louis. And it's a little unnerving because, let's face it, Nashville is not a team that you look at and go, damn, they're fast.
Nope.
You just don't say that.
Nope. Sure don't.
You just don't. So, I think the defense is going to have to be very responsible. I think they're going to have to be very responsible with the puck against a team like St. Louis, because St. Louis is all over somebody else's mistake. Kind of like a bully, but win some games. So looking ahead to next season and the matchups, not going to see St. Louis for a little while. Don't see them until December. And they have 2 games in December, the 11th and the 15th. One in Nashville, one in St. Louis. I think we're going to know so much about these two teams by the time they face each other for the first time. I think it's going to be really interesting to see, by December, you're going to know if St. Louis has done enough, and you're going to know if Nashville could make the adjustments that they need to make. I think you're going to have a pretty good idea of how these games are going to go against St. Louis in December. Kind of sucks, because it could go, it could be rough.
It really could go either way.
Yeah.
And I think that having those 2 games against the same opponent so close to one another, I can never, it's so circumstantial in terms of whether that's a good thing or a bad thing for a team. I mean, you get a good read on these teams. You've studied them, you've watched film, and you've lived it, because you just played them 4 days ago.
Right.
But that can be really advantageous, but it can also be a disadvantage because they've done the same thing with you. So they can read you. And so it's really just kind of a wash at the end of the day. But it's interesting. It'll be interesting that they've that is coming in December, that they won't have seen each other
Yeah.
before then, because these two teams, as you said, have had such different ends to their seasons last year, that it's like, okay, we're kind of going into this season like, okay, so which is it? Like,
Mhm.
are you the team that that you are on paper, or are you the team that finished the season last year?
Yes.
Maybe a little more so with Nashville, but still, I think that Nashville will now have a chance. Now, will they take that chance? Who knows? But they will have a chance to prove that they are not the team that they were last season by
Yeah.
the time they see St. Louis in December.
Yeah. I also kind of like that it's giving them some time, because those end of the season games against St. Louis for Nashville were very heated. They were very spicy. I'm almost positive, I would have to double check this, but I'm almost positive McCarron got kicked out. Maybe that,
I think he did.
I think
I
he
think he
got
did.
kicked out. And then, you don't have any time for anybody to forget that. And they came back together again. And it was just
Mhm.
very high frustration for Nashville. You had St. Louis riding vibes and a little bit of anger at McCarron,
Mhm.
and just Nashville could not gain traction. So, you know what? Let's cleanse the palate for October and November. And let's come
Let's
together in
sage the
December.
locker room for
Sage
more
the locker
reasons than
room.
one, but my
Yes.
goodness, like, ugh.
Yeah. Now they play again a third time in December. It is the first game back, the 27th, after Christmas break. Y'all, don't overeat the turkey. Be ready to play this Central Division rival when you come back from that brief little Christmas break. And then they play February 2nd in Nashville, which again is that week before the Olympic break. Stay dialed in. Just stay dialed in, Nashville. That's going to matter when you face this team. Interestingly enough, I think the Blues have a chance to get off to a very hot start. They only have 4 road games in October. Must be nice. Nashville was so much better at home last season. So much better at home. But St. Louis got the blessing of the schedule with that when it comes to October. So, we're going to know a lot about these two teams. We think we know who St. Louis is. We're going to find out for sure by the time these two teams face off. We are still hopeful that we have maybe some idea who Nashville is. We're going to get a better idea in training camp, which, by the way, friends, kicks off next week. That's right. Training camp, literally right around the corner. It is almost hockey season. So Emma and I, of course, will talk on Monday. We're going to talk about the young players, the prospects at the prospect tournament, and bring you all of the information from those games. Those games will be streamed at NashvillePredators.com, so you can check those games out over the weekend. And then we got to turn the page and be ready for training camp. Emma, I don't know what we're going to see at training camp, but we're not going to look at it with rose-colored glasses this year. Fool me once.
No, we're gonna look at it with a very large grain of salt.
Yeah.
I think that, remember, we got fooled last year, so
We
we'll
did.
see.
Yeah.
We're gonna be looking with one eyebrow raised, I think,
Yes.
through the entire training camp.
Yeah. But we will bring you all the news from training camp and all the news from the team as it happens. Before we log off on this Friday, though, Emma, let everyone know where they can find you and your work.
You can find me on social media at Emma_Lingan, and you can find my work at the Hockey News.
You can find me on social media at AnnK_Mama on Ice. You can find my work with Penalty Box Radio as well. Friends, that is going to do it for this Friday edition of the Locked On Predators podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen of the day. We will be back Monday to talk about the young Sprouts. We hope you guys have a great weekend. We'll see you then.